Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder. And last time, Early was pushed up the valley by Philip Sheridan after the Third Battle of Winchester. Now we join Early as he is determined to send Sheridan away from the agriculturally rich region to preserve the vital food source for the Army of Northern Virginia. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel. If you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page and purchase something from the Teespring store or Etsy shop. Every little bit helps. Thank you. Jubal Early and his Army of the Valley withdrew up the valley with Sheridan in pursuit. But try as he might, Sheridan wasn't able to catch Early and bring him to a decisive battle. Sheridan began to worry about his supply line as his army marched south, so he decided to move back down the valley toward the Potomac and used his cavalry to burn barns, mills, and crops while running off with livestock. A Confederate horseman remarked, "A smoky trail of desolation to mark the footsteps of the Devil's Inspector General, and show in a fiery record that will last as long as the war is remembered, that the United States under the government of Satan and Lincoln sent Philip Sheridan to campaign in the Valley of Virginia." The defeats at Winchester and Fisher's Hill again made the Southern public turn on Early. One of the biggest critics of Early was the new governor of Virginia, William Extra Billy Smith, who had been a subordinate of Early during the governor's time as a Confederate soldier. Smith wrote to Robert E. Lee advising him to relieve Early from command in the valley and replace him with John Breckinridge. Smith also told Lee he had an informant in the Valley Army that told him that Early had lost the confidence of his men. Lee would tell Smith that the public opinion and the opinion of the government was simply based on results, and thus did not understand the holistic picture of the military situation in the valley. Therefore, Lee believed that Early had done nothing wrong to date. Smith quieted down, but others rose up. Senator James Orr of South Carolina accused Early of being drunk at the Third Battle of Winchester, having got intoxicated from the contents of a little black bottle. Orr put forward a resolution calling for the Senate's military committee to investigate Early. Senator Benjamin Hill from Georgia even came forward to identify the spirits as apple brandy, even though he hadn't been present at the battle to say whether Early had been drinking or not. Early would write a letter asking the Senate to do an investigation, knowing they would find no wrongdoing. But the final act that put the Senate at rest, at least for the moment, was when John Breckinridge arrived at the Capitol and, being a witness at Winchester, told the senators that the entire story of Early's intoxication was fabricated. On October 9th, Early's cavalry were harassing Federals as they moved to the northern end of the valley. The rebel horsemen camped at Tom's Brook, where Federal cavalry suddenly attacked them and drove them from the area. The battle became known as the Battle of Tom's Brook, but it got a more famous name of the Woodstock Races because of how fast the Confederate cavalry skedaddled from the area. One rebel horseman remarked that the defeat was enough to make its old commander, General Jeb Stuart, weep in his grave. Ring down the curtain on that scene, for the cavalry played a regular exeunt act. Thomas Rosser, the Confederate cavalry commander, lost basically all of his command's wagons and ambulances and lost all but one artillery piece. It was a great victory for the Federal cavalry and a horrible loss for Early, who never thought much of his own cavalry that he had use of in the valley. The devastation to the valley by Federal forces was already having negative effects on Early and the Confederacy. It was making it difficult for Early to subsist his own army in the northern reaches of the valley, so it was only natural for him to pull back further south to around Stanton, but Early wouldn't do that. There needed to be a reversal in the valley. A significant victory against Sheridan could allow the Confederacy some breathing room and allow the valley citizens to get back on their feet. Sheridan didn't suspect Early would turn on his army at its position on Cedar Creek. It wasn't the best position, but the reports from his scouts indicated that Early's force was a significant distance away, and plus, Sheridan felt that after Winchester and Fisher's Hill, Early offered no threat to his command. On the morning of October 19th, Early launched a surprise attack against Sheridan's force, hoping to bag the Union general himself at his headquarters at Belle Grove, unaware that Sheridan, fresh off a trip from Washington, D.C., wasn't at his headquarters that day, but at Winchester. The attacks turned into bloody hand-to-hand melees. A Union soldier remembered splashes of blood and zigzag trails of blood and bodies of men and horses. I never on any battlefield saw so much blood as on this of Cedar Creek. The firm limestone soil would not receive it, and there was no pitying summer grass to hide it. Initially, Early put John B. Gordon in control of the attacks, but would take control himself a little after the attacks began driving the Federals from the field. But when he took over command of the operations, and how he did so is incredibly murky. As one of his biographers explained, one comes at least to a disturbing sense that Early was not in control. Whatever he was up to, whatever explains the chronological hiatus, it suggests a certain mental lethargy, a mood of hesitancy and uncertainty that was clearly discernible in the first order he issued after assuming command and in his conduct for the rest of the day. Add on to the chaos of battle, the heavy fog that morning lingered, causing both sides to grope through the opaque air for some semblance of the enemy. The Confederates were winning so far, but they were running up against a stubborn foe in the form of one division from the 6th Corps that was buying time for the rest of Sheridan's Army of the Shenandoah. A misjudged order sent Gabriel Wharton's division into the destructive volleys of the 6th Corps, which meant that Early now had no reserves, essentially. All of his men had been engaged. Nevertheless, Early believed the entire Federal army was on the run and counted it as a victory by late morning. When the fog burned off, he met with Gordon. Early said, "Well, Gordon, this is glory enough for one day. This is the 19th, precisely 1 month ago today. We were going in the opposite direction." Gordon responded, "Is very well so far, General, but we have one more blow to strike, and then there will not be left an organized company of infantry in Sheridan's army." Gordon then told Early that he was preparing every infantryman under his command and all of his artillery, his own and captured pieces, to blast away at the remaining 6th Corps troops. Early weirdly responded, "No use in that, they will all go directly." Gordon shot back, "That is the 6th Corps, General. It will not go unless we drive it from the field." "Yes," Early declared, "it will go too, directly." Gordon wrote in his reminiscences that, "My heart went into my boots, and so it came to pass that the fatal halting, the hesitation, the spasmodic firing, and the isolated movements in the face of the sullen, slow, and orderly retreat of this superb Federal Corps lost us the great opportunity and converted the brilliant victory of the morning into a disastrous defeat in the evening." Early's delay in attacking wasn't completely irresponsible. The attacks that morning confused his divisions to where many were intermingled, and he needed time to sort them out if another attack was made. Plus, Federal cavalry coming from the north threatened his right flank and rear. Hours went by, and this gave Sheridan enough time to organize his own troops for an attack, which he did after 3 p.m. The attack found a gap unobserved by Early in his own line and rolled up the Confederate brigades like a scroll. Early and his Army of the Valley ran for their lives south toward Newmarket. It was a miserable defeat for the Confederates, who just a few hours earlier seemed to have the entire battle wrapped up in their favor. A member of Joseph Kershaw's division remembered the retreat. Up the valley, this routed, disorganized rabble, it could not be called an army, marched. Every man as he saw fit, here a general at the head of a few squads called regiments, or a colonel or captain with a few men at his heels, some with colors and some without, here a colonel without a man, there a score or two of men without a commissioned officer. At one point we passed General Early, sitting on his horse by the roadside, viewing the motley crew as it passed by. He looked sour and haggard. You could see by the expression of his face the great weight upon his mind, the deep disappointment, his unspoken disappointment. The Battle of Cedar Creek was the breaking point for Early's time as commander of the 2nd Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia, and its status as the Army of the Valley when detached. Robert E. Lee knew he couldn't retain Early as the 2nd Corps commander when it came to Richmond and Petersburg. He allowed Early to remain in the Valley, but would siphon off troops as needed. In mid-November, Kershaw's division of Longstreet's Corps was sent to Richmond, and in December, the 2nd Corps, now under John B. Gordon, left the Valley and rejoined the Army of Northern Virginia. Early was left with Wharton's small division and some artillery and cavalry to guard the Valley. Sheridan kept a large force in the Shenandoah, but when the 2nd Corps left, he sent the 6th Corps back to Grant. After Cedar Creek and while still in the Valley, Early attended a church service on Sunday. During the sermon, the preacher asked the congregation about the resurrection. "What would be your feelings on that day? What would be your feelings at seeing all the dear ones who have gone before rise on that dread occasion? What would be your feelings at seeing those gallant ones who have given up their lives for their beloved country, rising in their thousands and marching in solemn procession?" The preacher and the congregation were shocked when Early loudly answered, "I would conscript every one of them." When 1865 dawned, Early went to meet General Lee in Richmond. Lee instructed him to do the best he could with the forces he had and assured him that his presence in the valley prevented valuable troops from being sent to Grant. In February, Early's command expanded, at least on paper. John C. Breckinridge, the commander of the Department of Southwestern Virginia and East Tennessee, became Secretary of War when James Seddon left the cabinet position. This left a vacancy in that department. Early, because of his close proximity to and the geographical connection between the valley and the Department of Southwest Virginia, was given command of that department as well. Also in February, Sheridan got orders to attack Lynchburg, to dismantle the railroad and any other infrastructure present there, then proceed to Grant. Early was determined to hold Sheridan at bay for as long as he could, deciding to make a stand at Waynesboro. His defensive line had a significant flaw. His left flank wasn't anchored, it was in the air. In reality, even if the Federals hadn't found the flaw in his line, the rebels under Early would most likely have broke under the weight of the Union attacks either way. But Sheridan's men broke Early's left flank and scattered the force. From atop an eminence, Early watched as his command disintegrated. Even his headquarters wagon was captured. In mid-March, Early traveled to Abingdon, Virginia, the official headquarters for the Department of Southwestern Virginia, where he remained until March 30th. When a telegram arrived for him from Lee, the power of the politicians and the public was too much for Lee to fight against in their attacks on Early. Lee was now bringing most of his capable troops to Petersburg, but Early wouldn't be coming. The affair at Waynesboro forced him to remove Early from command of the department entirely. He was to give Lunsford Lomax command over the troops in the valley and hand over departmental duties to John Eccles. In the telegram that Lee sent, it said a letter would follow. Early left Abingdon for his home at Rocky Mount, but didn't make it far before being overcome with pneumonia. He stayed a few days with his sister in Marion, Virginia, before continuing toward home. First by rail and then by an ambulance, it was riding over the rough Virginia roads in an ambulance that he received word that Lee had surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. He turned in torment on a litter, groaned, cursed, and then cried out, "Blow your horn, Gabriel." While staying at a friend's house in Rocky Mount, Early received a letter from Lee that had been promised in his March 30th telegram. It read in part, "My telegram will have informed you that I deem a change of commanders in your department necessary, but it is due to your zealous and patriotic services that I should explain the reasons that prompted my action. The situation of affairs is such that we can neglect no means calculated to develop the resources we possess to the greatest extent and make them as efficient as possible. To this end, it is essential that we should have the cheerful and hearty support of the people and the full confidence of the soldiers, without which our efforts would be embarrassed and our means of resistance weakened. I have reluctantly arrived at the conclusion that you cannot command the united and willing cooperation which is essential to success. Your reverses in the valley, of which the public and the army judge chiefly by the results, have, I fear, impaired your influence, both with the people and the soldiers, and would add greatly to the difficulties which will, under any circumstances, attend our military operations in southwestern Virginia. While my own confidence in your ability, zeal, and devotion to the cause is unimpaired, I have nevertheless felt that I could not oppose what seems to be the current of opinion, without injustice to your reputation and injury to the service. I am sure that you will understand and appreciate my motives, and that no one will be more ready than yourself to acquiesce in any measures which the interest of the country may seem to require, regardless of all personal considerations. Thanking you for your fidelity and energy with which you have always supported my efforts, and for the courage and devotion you have ever manifested in the service of the country, I am, very respectfully and truly, your obedient servant, R. E. Lee, General. After the surrender of Lee at Appomattox, other Confederate forces fell like dominoes, unable or unwilling to go on. Early remained at his home in Rocky Mount, Virginia, as those armies and garrisons capitulated to Union forces. For a man who took such a prominent role in the conflict, his lack of prominence in its final stage seems incredibly anticlimactic. However, as a new era dawned, in the wake of the death of the Confederacy, Early would take a much more prominent role in the reconstruction that followed the war as the defender of the lost cause.